Okay, Moonwalker, what is it, part 6 now? I think that's right. I think we're probably going to finish it today. There's really only kind of 2 sections left. There's the big Michael Jackson becomes a robot explosion action set piece, in which we are going to encounter, I think, mini matches. And then there's this kind of final performance, which I'm not sure what we're going to encounter inside of, and then that's it. That's the whole film. I might move a little briskly today. It's already late, and I'm motivated to kind of close out Moonwalker now so that I can return to other films. I'm really feeling a need to return to John Carpenter. I think we might do Prince of Darkness next. Prince of Darkness is a film that I already looked at on the channel. One of the very first things I looked at. But I didn't really give it the full Sync Century treatment. Those were kind of very short and scripted episodes that didn't approach anything like a kind of scene by scene, much less a shot by shot or frame by frame analysis. So I'd like to really do that now. I'd like to take Prince of Darkness first, and then In the Mouth of Madness, and really go through them and just record my thoughts about them in detail this time. Having thought through all that business to do with paradigm and meta-paradigm and kind of arrive at the central Rawian realization, which is some kind of realization about the relativity of our baseline reality perceptions and so on. I think those insights are going to assist in understanding John's films, which are very Robert Anton Wilson inspired, I think directly, which is the argument I made in that original 2-part series on Prince of Darkness. So anyway, before we do that though, we're going to close out Moonwalker, because this truly is one of the gems in the constellation, I'd say. I'm already confident saying, on the basis of everything we've looked at so far, but especially the stuff that takes place in the Speed Demon sequence and that kind of hovers around the Speed Demon sequence. This is a highly, highly active artifact, in my view. So, I wanted to say just a final little thought about this whole Smooth Criminal sequence. First of all, I want to note the presence of these 2 red candles. I think we missed these last time. Very nicely framed against, our favorite textural element there. All the shadow material converged from the outside. It's very much like a dream sequence. But fundamentally, I think what this scene is, or how I'm going to describe it, is just like, it's a bunch of people dressed as Mr. N enacting a kind of tower falling dance. Because this whole thing, right, is the lean. It's that they do this kind of gravity-defying thing that looks like they're going to fall over, but then they don't fall over. And that's part of Michael's kind of dance magic taking place here. But it also makes for a scene that I think is almost describing in ritual, or at the least in sort of performative, expressive dance language, a kind of symbolic restaging of the event. Here we have this blonde child with this little bear. I want to suggest that if you were to do a little capture of these 2 elements, and then kind of combine them together, you would get an image approximate to the idea of the South Tower explosion. Then, if you let this image progress slightly, you'll see that Mr. Big enters the scene and abducts the child. Mr. Big, we've talked about, is a... maybe I won't put it there, I'll put it over here. Mr. Big is a North Tower resonator. So the whole thing works as it's like a little fantasy that recreates in play form the central image, the reference object. just find this so strange. It's like a little dream about 9/11 that captures the event in the image space like this. We even have the twins represented here in the form of the bars. You know, it's the right color. That stark white highlight going down. You know, it starts to feel to me as if it's grabbing real aspects of the image structure. You know, and then where is this strange fantasy situated? It was situated in the middle of this big sort of leaning tower dance, you know? Isn't it amazing how look at this. This exists. I also neglected to mention last time how frequently we see Michael engulfed in smoke in this sequence. It's really a thing. I'll put up the examples. I actually don't know how many there are. I'll throw up a few more. But, you know, who knows? But there are just mini shots here where we see Michael's fedoraed head framed against smoke, which, you know, it ought to remind. You know, here he is with another vertical element as well, doubling up that N energy. I mean, look at this. You know, he's just kind of, his mouth is open, screaming, and then there's all this smoke. I mean, it's really so close to that idea, and, you know, we just can't seem to stay away from this funny double rectangle door up here on the balcony. It appears again in an image with these, and then we have, you know, it's all clustering. Gosh, that is a weird part of this movie. We could probably live in the Smooth Criminal sequence, you know. But let's move forward. Here we get this funny atomic kid idea here. You know, the bear covered in spiders now. It's like all this kind of extra leg idea, you know. It's just part of the ambiguity of the projection space there. I think really does allow one to imagine an animal covered in little spiders, you know. You can start to see how that fits the projection space. I know I've remarked on this several times during the analysis, but I really feel that the way Michael's hair works often comes together as a shape that implies the North Tower wound. It's part of what makes him an excellent N resonator. It's an interesting white. It's an eye and a spider that kind of dissolves into this monolith-like rock back here. Whoops. Now we see these three dogs again. You know, it's Cerberus energy, Hecate energy, just sort of underworld vibes, though, generally speaking, when you see sort of multiple copies of black dogs like this. There's an idea of exposure here. It's interesting because, you know, we see Michael on stage throughout so many of the tableaus in this film. And so this is a kind of stage, but it's a stage of, ultimately somehow it's a stage of crucifixion. There's definitely, you know, he's trying to avoid the light. This comes together as a very interesting mandala, I think. So, like, what's happening and where are we? It's like a big trap set deliberately by Mr. Big, I guess. Seems like an awful lot of trouble. So note that we hear the screams of the child before we see the situation, and they're kind of echoing up out of the elevator shaft. I think that must be a metaphor, emergent or otherwise, for the sort of flowing of repressed contents up through the deeper strata of the psyche into consciousness. It's just how Kubrick uses the elevator in The Shining. Elevators, stairwells, wells, entrances into caverns. These are all sort of, to some degree, interchangeable symbols that the psyche might use in the construction of a dream to represent to you something about its own nature as something with depth that has contents in it that might be brought to the surface or that might flow into the surface in some way. So it's very dreamy, but also very appropriate. We're about to witness a traumatic image, and that image bubbles up, as it were, through the psychical elevator shaft. And it opens, and what is it? It just bugs me out to see things that map so precisely like this. I want to make sure we get the right frame on it. And also I think this is a little too large. Okay, let's mark it up. Here we have Mr. Big in perfect Mr. N form. Here's the antenna. Here's the visor. B visor. Here's the very prominent belt. Business. And then here is the blonde child who we've seen associated with the bear. That little bear creature. All that together comes together. All that together comes together to form together a Kid Atomic image. Particularly because we've said before that a big part of that half of the image space is about something traumatic or spectacular happening, which is just what's happening here. It's a child being hurt. And that's really close to a central aspect of the projection space, I think, which is that it looks quite a bit like a baby having its throat cut. There's a strong idea of child sacrifice somehow built into the 9/11 projection space, it seems to me. And this comes together in a way that really captures it. It also gets, I think, a lot of abstract image structure to do with the buildings. This kind of rectangle mesh idea stuff back here, and the fact that it's on a blue background. You squint a little bit, it looks like it's on a blue sky. So that preserves a major aspect of the actual image. It's a central climactic image in Moonwalker that is an image of child abuse, so that ought to figure into our earthly read of what Moonwalker is about. At some level, it is a film about childhood trauma, because here's a big sort of central image in the film. But the film also tells you that this is an image that's bubbling up from a very deep layer. It comes up through the elevator. And then we see it, and what is it? Well, it's this really, really strange and perfect image match. Which I think gets a little bit more perfect, because don't we see Joe Pesci hold a syringe, finally? And the syringe is just a total North Tower idea in and of itself. You can read the entire North Tower as a giant syringe. It explains a bunch of kind of doctor resonance that we see sometimes on that side of the frame in these films. Hold on, I'm going to go grab my... wire.
To the twin tower representing clock towers.
We still live in a period of time in which everything is wired.
The walk is about a plot to rig a giant wire
wires
to the
everywhere.
twin towers.
Weird, guys. I can't look up into the sky without seeing wires, you know.
So Marty records the warning while Doc is rigging the wire to the
It
tower.
will not be that way forever.
Doc
It can't be. It's
understand
just a
the
ridiculous way to build
warnings for
infrastructure.
years.
Literally,
30
like
years later, the director makes a movie about rigging a wire to a tower.
sticks,
Twin
like
towers, because the warning
holding
within
up
Marty's
strings.
letter is about a terrorist attack.
It's not a
at the
good
Twin
idea. Okay,
Towers.
What's with the wire?
this is plugged
What's with
in.
the wire?
Let's let it progress a little bit. So many rainbow halos on Michael at the moment. Find that quite interesting. Then we see this interesting image. You know, the thing about this pairing is that it really preserves the correct diagonal relationship. So I find that quite impressive. And then here we just see it kind of echoed in silhouette, now in a frame that has a bunch of smoke and just kind of things that imply buildings now. So we're edging even closer, I would say, to not just to the projection space really, but to the really concrete aspects of the final image. I mean, I guess it's really a part of the projection space. It's precisely an intersection because it's about the material that can be imagined in a simultaneous kind of way across a given portion of image structure. Okay, and now they appear in alignment with banded rectangles again. So quite amazing. And by the way, recall how consistent this is now in this film, because one of the powerful matches that we discovered in the Smooth Criminal sequence contained in the S location, wasn't it a man in a fedora like beating a woman, like hitting a woman? So again, the explosion there got represented as a kind of an abuse scenario, and here it is the same way here, doubled up with the same kind of structures again. This one was quite a high-dimensional match, as I recall, because it had a movie poster. It also had another red-blue pair in the front, and twin rectangles up here, right, all of that. So I hope that's all right. I don't see these things when I'm actually making the videos. I have to edit in the video clips later. I'm just going by memory, but I think that's how that one fell. So here it falls that way rather again. Look at him. What a weird idea. It's not a normal idea. And what do they have to do? Wow, he's really looking end towery at the moment. How would you even construct this? Like, there must be a stick in there kind of glued or secured somehow to the back of it, you know, to give it that lift. Like, you know, someone had to design a prosthetic probably to even produce this bizarre look. They just can't keep away from framing them against these double rectangles. So there was the syringe we saw momentarily. Mr. Big's boots are a very interesting aspect of him. And then we see the shooting star. Now we just get a lot of kind of particle explosion imagery like this. Again, it's an area where I feel like it's not really... what to say about it? I would just say it's not really true that an explosion is an explosion. There are many ways that an explosion might come together on film. this one really highlights this kind of pixie dust aspect, which is just a very strong aspect of the explosion we got on the South Tower. So when I see stuff like this, constellating together in time with matches and other sorts of material like that, I take note of it. I think it's parts of the image bleeding through into the film here. I find it really surreal, those three dogs. It's a strange thing. We're going to encounter those dogs again, dogs just like that, in The Mouth of Madness. On the next episode of Sync Century. Actually, there will be several episodes in the future, so you have to get through Prince of Darkness first. Okay, now some kind of insane Ghostbusters portal in the sky idea is taking place. Also reminds me a bit of the end of Close Encounters. I feel that I should say something here as we're moving through it about the psychological, the sort of the personal psychological dimension of what this might all mean in the context of Michael Jackson's myth here. The truth is, I don't really know. There are so many ways to read this section. I would say that this section definitely tells us that Moonwalker is a film about child abuse in some way. In exactly what way, I don't know. I'll have to stew on it a bit, I suppose. One thing I would like to note just right now, because it occurred to me, and otherwise I'll forget. Michael Jackson and Mr. Big form the two major N resonators in this film. I think we can say that having looked at the thing. I mean, Michael carries the N Tower so much of the time in so many of the tableaus we've seen. And it's clear why, he embodies many characteristics of the N Tower in his costuming and various other ways. And same with Mr. Big. And in a certain way, I think Mr. Big is even a purer North Tower resonator. His whole kind of hairstyle and visor scenario, and then the fact that he appears in that big central image match that we just saw in front of the elevator shaft and all of this. We could say that Michael and Mr. Big are interchangeable in the 9/11 projection space map, right? They map to the same object, but they also seem to map to the same object in a potential read anyway of the psychology here. Just in the sense that Mr. Big may be, in some very direct way, a representation of Michael's shadow. So, I don't know. It seems nicely linked up there. For that reason, I find that read to be harmonic and pleasant. That doesn't mean it's correct, of course, in terms of diagnosing Michael Jackson. That's not what I'm trying to do here. That's not a possible thing to do, really, on the basis of looking at a work of art. So that has to remain a question. But it's just, I would just say that the things we've seen in this film are very consistent with an understanding of Michael Jackson as a man who had a lot of complexes to do with children and childhood and violence. And, that's no surprise given what we know about his biography, of course. These things were the texture of his life, How any of that did or didn't manifest in his behavior historically is, an open question at this point in time. I've expressed my opinion about it before. I won't restate it now. I think that the film is definitely a window into his pain, though. So confronted by whatever it is that he's been confronted by here, he's now going to undergo some kind of a very turbocharged transformation and become robotic. I think this is a very cool sequence just from a special effects standpoint. It looks incredible. Okay. I just wanted to note that we have a scale shift here that really starts to imply that Michael might be a big building. Also, this is an obviously giant Christ sort of crucifixion image occurring. So now Michael is transforming into some kind of real, like, mech mode. What do we think the meaning of this might be symbolically? I really don't know. I'm a little stumped. I mean, it has the feeling of a fortification, armor, you know? It's not an image of a human being. It's a colossus, you know, it's a god form of some kind. In my opinion, Hecate is present here in the image space, because there's her wheel. We saw the 3 dogs, black dogs. She presides over liminal spaces. I feel that transformation is connected to that. You know? And then here we have her wheel. It's amazing how many people Michael mows down. For a pop star, he's a pretty cold-blooded killer. Look at how cool this is. Such awesome animation. Big focus on the mouth, you know. The kind of thing that I notice, you know, is just like, where do all the explosions happen in this movie? Well, there's just a million bajillion explosions right in this portion of the movie that kind of revolves around, in my view, the revelation of that central image. The big image match with Mr. Big. That appears, and then suddenly we just have every single instance of a big fireworky-like explosion we could possibly get. We see Mr. Big hit by the sparks there even, you know. It's like when these things decide to happen in these movies bugs me out often. I mean, look how gratuitous it is. There's so many explosions here. You see, it's a kind of an aborted individuation myth, though. Integration with the shadow is never achieved. Instead, the ego kind of encases itself into this pure robotic form, maximum rigidity, defensiveness, and it banishes the forces of darkness back into the underground. Well, it's a very solar story. It doesn't include the lunar half that would lead to a confrontation with one's deeper nature, fundamentally. I feel that part is avoided here in the story very strongly. And one could ask the question as to why. I mean, it's often avoided. You know, now Michael is a starship who can completely escape the entire problem. But he escapes it by flying away. Wait, what? What even happened there? Yeah, it totally hits the ship, but it just doesn't insta blow up the ship, right? It just kind of knocks Michael out of orbit. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that's bizarre. It's not really how this concludes, right? He doesn't just, like, leave the children behind in the middle of the dark cityscape. That can't be the thing. Off Michael goes into the stars. Okay, I guess maybe that really is how it concludes. Oh, look. Wow. He collides with the shooting star and goes kind of supernova. This is the meaning of this. Fitting conclusion, I feel, to an artifact that has just been a really stupendous trip. I feel like every time we see her, she exists in a tighter Atomic Kid reference space, you know. Now the dog has a red bandana around its neck, you know, which, you know, we've said one of the things about Kid A is that it looks like maybe it's been like an animal that's been slaughtered, and now we have the bear with the red around its neck, and then it's also attached to like a yellow star, which kind of implies an explosion idea, and then her again as the child with the golden hair that then appears in the big central Mr. Big image match. So if we think that Mr. Big represents Michael Jackson's shadow, which I know is just one possible interpretation here, but it's kind of my pet theory at the moment, then this becomes a very sinister kind of scene, I think. It's like all the abuse, which is represented kind of metaphorically in the dream zone there, is all repressed again, and now they just go back to their strange life, whatever it is, you know. Back to Neverland, as it were. So you see what I meant about this being a loop point. We're returning again to the same set, back to the smooth criminal set. Bugs and drugs. Real smooth operation. You know, I wasn't going to say anything. Sometimes I repress my desire to mention things. I'm like, Jordan, they're just red lights. Don't be insane about red lights. But, I mean, look how the shot kind of concludes here. It's just such a perfect stamped red twins image that then also has this kind of family photo in the middle with, you know, the blonde-haired child with the bear and then all the hats and, you know, the predictable end configuration we've mentioned on the other side, so that works as another match. This is really an impressive film. It contains so many of these strange alignments. Two rats, I believe. I mean, I find that a bit strange. Why is there just this phantom explosion here in the corridor of symmetrical red lights, you know? It's a strange scene, I think. Oh, now we're reunited with the dog, and the Atomic Kid image space is really completed. And isn't it funny how this all kind of takes place behind the scenes of the stage production in the end? As if everything we've witnessed is occurring somehow behind the spectacle. So now Michael is clothed in gold, and we get our final performance sequence here. I really, really think that this is where we get the basic power line idea from in A Goofy Movie, which is a mega, mega, mega Red Twins loaded film. We'll probably have to look at it at some point. I have no idea when I'll get to that, but yeah, strange interlink with MJ and Moonwalker. Now, this is a cover of a Beatles song, right? Bugs and drugs, real smooth operation. Again, I'm reminded of that quote. Potentially strange interlinkages there. And that's it. That's the end. And I think the very last thing we get is a restatement of Smooth Criminal during the credits. Okay. That's it. We made it through it. I'm calling it. We're done with Moonwalker. I am not going to even attempt to provide some kind of summarizing, closing series of statements. The trip we took through it will have to stand on its own. Not every dot always gets connected, but we connected enough, for me anyway. This is quite a loaded artifact. It deserves a central position in the... I don't know... in the encyclopedia about this thing that will be written someday. So, okay. That's it for now. And I will see everyone in the future. Bye-bye.
Hey guys, you're here with Cinema Blend, and we've got some news for you. The new series Urban Myths, which will follow Michael Jackson, Marlon Brando, and Elizabeth Taylor in a plot that will incorporate the 9/11 terrorist attacks, has finally gotten some real footage, and you can take a look at what Joseph Fiennes will look like playing the King of Pop. The myth goes that he, Taylor, and Brando were all trying to get out of New York and end up renting a car and going on a bizarre road trip. Brian Cox and Stockard Channing are set to co-star in the episode as the other two famous actors. The 8-part series will also feature myths about Adolf Hitler, Bob Dylan, Tim Leary, and even Samuel Beckett. There's been some pushback regarding Joseph Fiennes playing the role of Michael Jackson, as the actor and the musician are not the same race. But Fiennes has tackled the question head on, noting that the story is less about Jackson and more about being uber famous and what that feels like. Not everyone is happy about the casting, but a comedy series featuring Michael Jackson and Adolf Hitler is sure to garner a lot more attention when it's released on January 19th than it would have otherwise. Let us know if you're interested in seeing the series in the comments below, and keep checking back with us to stay up to date on all the latest. This has been News with Cinema Blend. We'll see you next time.